An internal combustion engine being used in a building under construction must be ventilated. Guardrails and personal fall arrest systems shall be provided where platforms or walkways cannot feasibly be at least how wide? 18 inches. The employer shall certify compliance of employee training by providing a certificate to the employee. The following are facts that you may need to know to pass the NASCLA accredited exam. I will give the title of the reference books once and then list the facts that you should know. Wheelchair turning spaces must be a minimum of 60 inches by 60 inches or have a 60-inch diameter. Accessible routes must have a clear width of 36 inches. The maximum force to open a hinged door is 5 pounds. What is the maximum height above the ground for door handles on accessible doors? 48 inches. The rise of any ramp shall not exceed 30 inches. An elevator keypad should be patterned like a telephone keypad. Parking spaces must be at least 96 inches wide. The area around an accessible parking space must not slope greater than 1/4 in 12. An accessible toilet centerline should be at least 18 inches from the sidewall. Grab bars must carry a load of 250 pounds. The height of the top of a top-loading washing machine must not exceed 36 inches. What is the height requirement of handicapped grab bars that are adjacent to a water closet? 33 to 36 inches. 3 handicap accessible parking spaces are required for a parking lot with a total of 60 spaces. The following facts come from the business book. Become familiar with the advantages and disadvantages of the different business organizations. A sample question follows. Which business organization would continue to exist after the demise of the owner? Answer: corporation. General partnerships require formal agreement between the partners. Partnerships are automatically dissolved if one of the partners leaves the partnership. Each partner of a general partnership is totally liable for all debts of the partnership. A limited partner's liability is equal to the amount they invest. Preparation of a business plan is the single most important task to ensure the success of a business. Business names must be registered. Become familiar with the elements of a business plan. Become familiar with the advantages and disadvantages of the different business structures. The different types of insurance policies offered a contractor are workman's compensation, motor vehicle coverage, property insurance, and general liability. General partnerships need a formal agreement. All partners are liable for the total debt of the partnership. Completed operations coverage covers defective products when they are out of your hands or completed work away from your premises. The 3 parties to a bond are the contractor, the owner, and the bonding company. Bid bonds guarantee that the contractor will enter the contract with the owner for the bid amount. Bidding is not considered a construction management activity. Limited partners are only liable for the amount that they invest in the partnership. The 4 parts of an estimate are labor, equipment, material, and overhead. Become familiar with the different types of insurance coverage. The employer pays for workman's compensation coverage. CGL insurance does not include vehicle liability, workman's compensation, or employer's liability. The most accurate method to estimate a construction project is the quantity survey method, which is also known as the detail survey method. Become familiar with the different types of insurance coverage, specifically what is included in comprehensive general liability coverage. The employer pays for workman's compensation coverage. Labor should be estimated by the type of activity. In order for a contractor to not be liable for workers' compensation for subcontractor employees, what should the contractor request from the subcontractor? Certificate of insurance. Theft can be minimized by keeping material inventory levels as low as possible. Project overhead is also known as job overhead and also as direct cost. Be familiar with the different types of bonds. The best method for estimating overhead is to use historical data. The 2 methods to schedule a construction project are the bar chart and the critical path method, also known as CPM. The term float is used with the critical path method. The purpose of all governmental agencies is to protect the public. Sediment is the main factor that affects water quality. Construction runoff is 10 to 20 times more than agricultural runoff. Phase 2 of the Clean Water Act covers construction activities from 1 to 5 acres. Use of water is the best method to eliminate dust on a construction project. A formal emergency action plan is not required if the employer has 10 or fewer employees. OSHA injury records, Form 300, are not required if the employer has 10 or fewer employees. Keep OSHA reports for 5 years. The maximum OSHA fine is $70,000. The distributor of chemicals used in construction should provide the MSDS sheets. When materials are first delivered to a job site, they should be checked for quality and quantity. Refer to Chapter 7 for federal employer guidelines and Chapter 12 for state employer guidelines. The Fair Labor Standards Act covers minimum wage, overtime pay, child labor, and record keeping only. Become familiar with the list of items that are considered bid documents. A work week includes 168 hours. An exempt employee is exempt from abiding by the Fair Labor Standards Act for overtime requirements. Employers who knowingly violate the minimum wage or overtime requirements are subject to a penalty of $1,000 per violation. ADA requirements do not apply to employers with fewer than 15 employees. The most accurate method to estimate a construction project is the quantity takeoff method. Be familiar with the items included as labor burden. The I-9 form, which proves that an employee is a legal alien, must be completed within 3 days of the employee starting work. It must be retained for 5 years. Know the definition of contingency and become familiar with project overhead and company overhead. General overhead costs include the company's administration expenses. Understand the difference between markup and margin. A benefit of a cost control system is more accurate estimating. Labor estimates should include non-productive estimates for planning the work. In an estimate, a contractor should account for added security of a project site by applying all of the following methods except order large quantities of materials to minimize the number of deliveries. Learn the benefits of using a job cost system. A computerized cost system is used to shorten the time required to produce an estimate. Form SS8 should be filed to determine if a worker is an employee or an individual contractor. A federal deposit includes all federal income tax withheld, plus the employer's and the employee's contribution for Social Security and Medicare. Form 8109 is turned in to the federal depository along with the deposit. The Social Security rate is 6.2% and the Medicare rate is 1.45%. The FUTA rate is 0.8% and is paid with Form 940. Another name for the employer's tax guide is Circular E. All payments to government agencies that fall due on Saturday are actually due on the next business day. Examples of source documents are check stubs and copies of invoices. The required elements of a contract are agreement and consideration. Become familiar with the items that are included in an offer. Become familiar with the cause of breach of contract, the provisions to limit risk in a contract, and an indemnification clause of a contract. While using the cash method of accounting, no attempt is made to match revenues with expenses. The percent of completion method used with long-term contracts depends on an accurate estimate. Become familiar with the different types of contracts and with the different contracting methods. The basic accounting equation is assets equal liabilities plus net worth. Be familiar with the steps required to produce a change order. Note the advantages of a written contract. Working capital is defined as current assets minus current liabilities. The debt-equity ratio is calculated by dividing the total liabilities by the net worth. The formula for calculating the profit margin is divide the net profit by the total revenues. Become familiar with both methods of scheduling a construction project. Negotiation is not considered part of a formal contract. The main reason for having a formal contract is to prevent disputes. The primary weakness of the Gantt method of scheduling is that it does not show the dependency of activities to each other. The primary weakness of a bar chart or a Gantt chart schedule is that it does not show any dependencies. A counteroffer voids an offer. Become familiar with the responsibilities of a project manager. Bidding is not considered part of contract management. Construction contracts do not have to be in writing to be enforceable. Controlling deliveries helps minimize theft loss. If the intent of a statement in a contract cannot be interpreted, the judgment is made against the party who wrote the contract. Business trusts are created to hold or protect property for beneficiaries. Bid documents include the following: invitation to bid, instruction to bidders, and bid forms. New hire information must be reported to the New Hire Operations Center within 20 days. The purpose of the licensing board is to protect the public. Become familiar with questions that an employer may ask a potential employee. The new hire reporting group must be notified within 20 days of hiring a new employee. A general contractor's license is required for contractors who build projects costing more than $30,000. Become familiar with FLSA requirements. The penalty for willful violation of minimum wage and overtime requirements is $1,100 per violation. The I-9 form must be completed within 3 days of employment. ADA requirements apply when there are 15 or more employees. The beginning SUTA rate is 1.2%. OSHA records should be retained for 5 years. Failure to comply with federal lead regulations has a maximum penalty of $25,000 per day. Workman's compensation insurance is required if the employer has 3 or more employees. Increased safety results in more profit. A new employer's SUTA rate is 1.2%. An employer is not required to have a formal emergency action plan unless he has more than 10 employees. An employer is not required to keep OSHA injury records unless he has more than 10 employees. Lead paint has not been produced since 1978. Become familiar with the IRS guidelines to determine if a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. Become familiar with the different methods of depreciation. Source documents includes any item that proves that a transaction took place. What would be the most appropriate method for establishing a disbursements account for a large construction company? Establish a separate journal for disbursements and a separate journal for payroll payments. Become familiar with the different financial statements and the associated accounting terminology. The statement of cash flows examines the cash generation and distribution activities of the firm. Become familiar with the different financial ratios. The cash method of accounting does not match revenues with expenses. The Social Security rate for employees is 6.2%. The W-4 form must be completed prior to making a federal withholdings deposit. Labor liens are filed against real estate. A lien must be filed within 120 days of last furnishing labor and materials. A request for a judgment to enforce the lien must be filed within 180 days of the last furnishing of labor and materials. A lien is filed with a clerk of the Superior Court in the county where the real property is located. Federal identification numbers are assigned by the IRS. Be familiar with the different types of taxes. Another name for the employer's tax guide is Circular E. Report FUTA taxes using Form 940. Use Form 1099 to report payments to subcontractors. The following facts come from the carpentry book. Dimension lines indicate the starting point and ending point of a dimension. Architectural blueprints are developed using plan views, sections, details, and elevations. When precise information is needed about a portion of a building, a detailed drawing is used. The formula for calculating board footage is the linear footage times the size divided by 12. A benchmark is defined as the starting point from which measurements can be made. The string line of a batterboard system must be at least 4 feet from the batterboard. Foundation walls should be moisture-proof prior to being backfilled. Place the welded wire mesh in the center of the vertical dimension of a slab and reinforcing bars in the center of the thickened edge around the perimeter of the slab. Flooring boards shrink more across the width than along the length. Decay-resistant woods like cedar and cypress are best used as exterior siding. Never notch a glulam beam. Wood beams should have a 1/2 inch space around the ends when placed in a masonry or concrete beam pocket. Walls taller than 10 feet must be fire blocked at 10-foot intervals. Use a cricket, also known as a saddle, behind chimneys that are more than 30 inches wide. Other names for the common roof truss are the W truss and the Fink truss. Plywood roof sheathing joints should be staggered. The top portion of a door jamb is called the head jamb. The panel door is made using stiles and rails. Know the definitions of shingle exposure, head lap, and top lap. The door jamb should be flush with the wall. The joint between two wood shingles should be at least 1/4 inch, and the side lap, also known as the offset, should be 1 1/2 inches. Nail fascia boards to the rafter tails. Beveled siding should be lapped 1 inch. Wraparound hangers and spikes and ferrules are used to attach gutters to the fascia. House wrap does not act as a vapor barrier. No wall sheathing is required when using plywood siding. The horizontal dimension of a set of stairs is called the run. Kitchen base cabinets are 24 inches deep and the wall cabinets are 12 inches deep. When hanging wall cabinets, the screw should penetrate the stud at least 1 inch. Building paper placed on the exterior frame walls and paper backing on fiberglass insulation acts as a vapor barrier. Floor insulation in a crawl space must be adequately supported. When unfaced fiberglass insulation is placed in walls, friction holds the insulation in place. Insulation placed in interior walls is used for sound deadening purposes. Sound transmission can be reduced by fastening the interior wall covering to resilient metal furring channels. Install finished flooring prior to final interior trim. Wood flooring should be acclimated for 4 to 5 days before installation. Ceramic tile is more durable than vinyl composite tile. The chimney hood helps prevent downdrafts. Figure 44-11. Which type of sheet product is recommended to be used for the backing when applying ceramic tile or other wall tile? Cementitious backer board. A longitudinal board that is used to attach the deck joist to the house framing is called a ledger. Which provisions of the construction documents would most likely address requirements for special reporting and document of construction activities for archaeological sensitive areas of a job site? Supplementary conditions. Some sealants are not compatible with other materials. How is a contractor to determine which sealant to use in a particular application? Refer to the technical specifications. An addendum is issued prior to entering a construction contract. Conflicts on construction documents are resolved by the architect. Project data, shop drawings, and samples are examples of submittals. The submittal process affects the project schedule and quality. A dry shack is a building used to house workers during a rainstorm or to serve as a dining room. When the contractor employs union labor, what must exist between the contractor and the union? A labor agreement. Quality control is defined as meeting or exceeding the owner's expectations. The schedule of values is based on the estimate. Substantial completion of a construction project is when the architect determines that the project is ready for use by the owner. This is also referred to as beneficial occupancy. Operation and maintenance manuals are organized per the CSI format. Operations and maintenance training sessions are conducted by the manufacturer's representative. The contractor should get a signed receipt from the owner for as-built drawings. The owner should require lien releases from all subcontractors. The sequence of project closeout events is found in Figure 17.1. The most important aspect of substantial completion is the date. For project closeout, the test and tolerance information should include what? Method of testing. One of the last activities during closeout of the project is to change the lock cylinders. Which document will be required from the contractor before the release of final money? Affidavit of payment. The following facts come from the Quality Concrete Construction book. What influence do below freezing temperatures have on curing concrete? A longer time is needed. The slump test is used to measure the consistency of concrete. Air entrainment is used to increase the resistance to the freeze-thaw cycle of concrete. The compressive strength of concrete at 7 days is 66% of the design strength. Become familiar with the uses of the 5 types of Portland cement. As the water-cement ratio of concrete increases, the compressive strength decreases. Retarders are used when the temperature of concrete is high to slow the hydration process. Accelerators are used when the temperature is low to speed up the hydration process. Calcium chloride is the most common accelerator. Slumps should range between 3 and 4 inches. The time that the concrete should stay in the truck drum is limited to 300 revolutions or 90 minutes. The best foundations to use with poor soils are pilings or augured piers. Use an isolated footing to support columns. Use a floating foundation when the bearing capacity of the soil is low. The designer of concrete forms should be concerned with the weight and shape of the concrete. Double-headed nails are used while constructing concrete forms. The lowest grade of plywood used for forming is BB. Form liners are used to provide special textures or patterns on concrete surfaces. Concrete weighs approximately 150 pounds per cubic foot. Diesel oil is one of the most common barrier-type form release agents. The form is used to control the elevation of a concrete slab. Fiber reinforcing is used to help eliminate cracks in concrete slabs. Become familiar with the different rebar grades and how they are indicated on the bars. The recommended minimum splice length for steel rebar is 12 inches. Become familiar with the different types of joints used with concrete. Control joints should be cut to 1/4 of the thickness of the slab. Welded wire mesh should be placed in the upper portion of a concrete slab. Rounded aggregate, like creek pebbles, is preferred for pump mix design. The vibrator should be inserted into the concrete fast and removed slow. The sequence of activities for finishing a concrete slab are screed, float, and final finish. The purpose of a bull float is to level the high and low portions of a slab. Higher temperatures cause the concrete to have less strength. Concrete slab areas should be wet down prior to pouring to prevent the dry surface from taking moisture from the concrete. Never pour concrete on frozen ground. To cure concrete is to control the drying of the concrete during the hydration process. Overworking of concrete may cause segregation. Excessive bleeding of concrete can be prevented by adding more sand to the mix, by air entrainment, by increasing the cement content, and by adding fly ash. The best method to prevent concrete surface scaling is the use of air entrainment. Minimum sling angle is 45 degrees. The following facts come from the erector's manual. The precast erector should make certain that there are provisions in the contract for site access. The main concern when lifting precast slabs is the rotation of the slab. The minimum diameter bolt used for precast connections is 1/2 inch. Use an expansion bolt where the regular bolt is misplaced. When erecting precast members, the minimum working load capability when swing stages are used to accommodate 3 workers is 750 pounds. Scaffold used to erect precast concrete members should be anchored at 25-foot intervals. Defective equipment used to erect precast concrete members should be removed from the job. Use a minimum of 2 straps for gutter downspout. The cost to operate a building built using green techniques should be compared with the cost if non-green techniques are used. Green buildings use 36% less energy than conventionally constructed buildings. Wastewater from the kitchen sink is not considered gray water. Thermal masses do not absorb heat for more than 6 inches deep. Construction of buildings generates 4 pounds of waste per square foot of building. The following facts come from the Gypsum Handbook. Moisture weakens drywall. The letter used to designate fire code gypsum board is X. Use exterior drywall in building soffits. The advantages of veneer plaster include rapid installation, fire resistance, sound control, and durability.
Felt used behind gypsum wall sheathing should be lapped 2 inches.
What would be the most cost-efficient stud to use for non-bearing interior petitions? 25 gauge.
Corner bead is used on 90-degree outside corners.
The least expensive metal stud is 25 gauge.
Z-channels are the best to use as part of a sound attenuation system. Be familiar with the different types of drywall fasteners. All habitable rooms must have a glazed area of 8% of the floor area of the room. Powder setting type joint compound sets up faster than other joint compounds. This table gives the minimum stud spacing for veneer plaster systems. Furring channels should be spliced 8 inches. Wire is used to attach carrying channels to the joist supports. Horizontal furring channels should be installed 4 inches from the floor and the ceiling. 25 gauge metal stud walls will support doors weighing no more than 100 pounds. Use 1,000 screws per 1,000 square feet of gypsum board when the studs are spaced 16 inches on center, and 850 screws per 1,000 square feet when the studs are 24 inches on center. Drywall should be stored in the center of each room, flat on the floor, with the ceiling boards on top. In cold weather, the minimum temperature for drywall during application is 50 degrees. The drywall joints on the opposite side of a frame wall should be staggered. Where 2 gypsum boards meet on a framing member, apply 2 continuous 3/8 inch beads of adhesive along the edges of the face of the member. The maximum curve for gypsum board is 90 degrees. Doors in gypsum board walls may act as control joints. Open spaces between panels greater than 1/4 inch wide shall be filled with joint compound 24 hours prior to applying the first coat. The minimum temperature to apply veneer plaster is 55 degrees, and the relative humidity should be between 20 and 50%. Veneer plaster is tougher than drywall. Corner bead fasteners should be spaced no more than 12 inches on center. Control joints in gypsum petition walls should not be spaced more than 30 feet on center. Preferred ceiling channels that are installed perpendicular to the joist should be spaced 24 inches on center. A runner is not a component of an acoustical ceiling grid. Be familiar with the step-by-step installation procedures of acoustical ceilings. Install wall angle first. The maximum temperature to store gypsum board is 125 degrees. You should always refer to Chapter 6 when the question relates to the type of construction. Parapet walls acting as firewalls should extend 30 inches above the roof. When combustible members, such as wood beams, enter from each side of a masonry firewall, they must be separated by at least 4 inches. When structural steel members are fireproofed, bolt heads should not be closer than 1 inch to the edge of the fireproofing. When wood floor sleepers are used beneath wood flooring, fire blocking must be installed. The use of combustible roof insulation is approved if the roof covering is applied directly thereto. All platforms more than 30 inches high should have a 42-inch guardrail. All means of egress doors should have a minimum width of 32 inches. The height of sliding glass door thresholds should not exceed 3/4 inch, while other types of door thresholds should not exceed 1/2 inch. The maximum unlatching force for panic hardware is 15 pounds. The maximum riser for a set of stairs should not exceed 7 inches, while the tread width must be at least 11 inches. The headroom height should be at least 6 foot 8 inches. Stairway handrail should be between 34 and 38 inches high. A round handrail should have a maximum diameter of 2 inches. All handrails should have a 1 1/2 inch clearance. If the word rescue is used in an exam question, always go to paragraph 1009 and note the exceptions. A window opening should be at least 5.7 square feet, and the maximum sill height should be 44 inches. The maximum thickness of metal veneer siding is 0.0149 inches, while the maximum spacing of fasteners is 24 inches. Fasteners for vinyl siding that is installed horizontally should not exceed 16-inch horizontal spacing and 12-inch vertical spacing. Be familiar with the different fire classifications of roofing. The maximum slope for asphalt shingles is 2 and 12 when installed with a 2-plies of 15-pound felt, and 4 and 12 when installed with 1-ply of 15-pound felt. The fasteners for asphalt shingles shall be galvanized, stainless steel, aluminum, or copper. The flashing width for open valleys in asphalt shingles is 16 inches. The thickness of aluminum valley flashing is 0.024 inches, and for galvanized valley flashing is 0.0179 inches. Drip edge should lap 2 inches, and the maximum spacing of the fasteners should be 12 inches. You should be familiar with the wood shake and wood shingle tables on pages 286 and 287. The minimum slope of a built-up roof is 1/4 and 12. If coal tar pitch is used, the minimum slope is 1/8 and 12. If more than 25% of the roof must be replaced due to wear or damage, the entire roof must meet the present code. The maximum allowable deflection of a floor joist is given by the formula D equals L over 360, where L is the length. Use special inspectors to inspect special bolts used to connect structural steel. Compacted fill around a foundation must slope away at a minimum of 1 in 20. Steps and continuous footings are required when the grade slopes more than 10%. The bottom of a building footing must be at least 12 inches below finished grade. The compressive strength required for fitting concrete is 2,500 psi at 28 days. Use 6 mil poly for damp proofing and waterproofing. The acceptance test is used to determine if concrete meets the compression strength specifications. A test is required for each 150 cubic yard or 5,000 square foot of concrete poured. 2 cylinders are taken for each test. No test is required for less than a 50 cubic yard pour. If concrete is kept moist during the hydration process, it is being cured. Concrete made with type 1 Portland cement should be cured for 7 days at 50 degrees, while concrete made with type 3 Portland cement should be cured for 3 days at 50 degrees. Rebar is used to increase the tensile strength of concrete. It should be free of coatings such as mud, paper, and oil. Welded wire mesh should be placed in the middle of a slab. Concrete covers the distance from the edge of the concrete to the edge of the rebar. Plain concrete is concrete that does not have rebar added. It may be used in structural elements that do not have tensile stresses. Unreinforced structural concrete basement walls must be at least 7 1/2 inches thick. Other concrete walls may be 5 1/2 inches thick. Openings for doors and windows must have 2 number 5 bars above each opening. These bars must extend 24 inches past the corners of the opening.
The following facts come from the Construction Job Site Management book. Note that this book only covers the management of construction projects from the time that the contract is awarded till closeout of the project.
The following are facts from the joist book. The joist table is a summary of some of the facts used on the exam. There are 2 types of bar joists, underslung and bottom chord bearing. The Steel Joist Institute has placed the 4 types of joists into 3 categories. See appendices B, C, and D. There are 2 anchor bolts and 2 bearing plates for each joist. The joist designation 18K7 indicates that the joist is 18 inches deep and is a K-series. The girder designation 36G9N6K indicates that the girder is 36 inches deep at midspan, that there are 9 spaces, and that the maximum load at top chord panel points is 6,000 pounds. Bar joists are transported and stored in bundles upside down. To lift a bundle, the choker should be placed under the bottom chord. Joists should not be lifted by the web or by the strapping. They are typically lifted by the bundle. Steel joists should be stored at the job site, vertical, laid flat, or as shipped. The tag end of a joist must be set as shown on the joist placement plans. Joist girders must be erected singly. When columns are not framed in at least 2 directions, joist at column lines must be fill bolted. Joist girders are stabilized using stabilizer plates. The joist must be placed at top chord panel points of the girders. Square-ended bar joists should be oriented so that the first web starts top end of the joist and slope down away from the end. To increase the lateral stability of bottom chord bearing joists, bridging must be added at each end. When columns are not framed in at least 2 directions, joists at column lines must be fill bolted. The ends of each joist must be tack welded immediately after the joist is set in place. This occurs prior to the joist being bridged. Placing construction loads on unbridged joists is prohibited. To increase the lateral stability of bottom chord bearing joists, bridging must be added at each end. Joist bridging is furnished in 20-foot lengths. The minimum lap for bridging is 3 inches. When bridging is welded, the weld must withstand a 700-pound force. The joist manufacturer and the engineer of record must approve any modifications to joist products. Use this table to become familiar with the number of rows of bridging required prior to releasing the hoisting cable. Uplift forces are resisted by application of bottom chord bridging. Joist bridging material is normally furnished in 20-foot lengths. The minimum lap for horizontal bridging is 2 inches. Placing construction loads on unbridged joists is prohibited. The maximum weight of a bundle of bridging to be hoisted into a building is 1,000 pounds. The purpose of camber is to make the joist stronger and to allow for any deflection that may occur. Camber is optional. The recommended camber for a 60-foot long joist is 1 1/2 inches. Joist welds must withstand a horizontal force of 700 pounds. This table gives the total number of rows of bridging required. The following facts come from the masonry book. Use carbide or diamond dusted blades to cut masonry. Learn the uses of the different types of building and facing brick. Know the difference between modular and non-modular brick. A 3/8 inch thick mortar joint should be used to produce nominal dimensions. Any concrete masonry product that is more than 75% solid is considered a solid product. The durability of brick is affected by heat, cold, wetting, drying, and the action of soluble salts. Be familiar with the different brick bonds described on these pages. A wythe is a single unit thick masonry wall. Efflorescence is a white chalky substance found on brick and block walls due to a chemical reaction. The tooled mortar joint is the most waterproof. Use FTX unglazed clay tiles when a high degree of mechanical perfection is required. The weight of an 8-inch CMU made with sand and gravel is 40 pounds, while the compressive strength ranges from 1200 to 1800 psi. A 2-core CMU is stronger. A 2-core CMU is stronger than a 3-core and is better suited to allow rebar or conduit to be installed through the cells. The nominal dimensions of an 8-inch CMU are 8 inches by 8 inches by 16 inches, while the actual dimensions are 7 5/8 inches by 7 5/8 inches by 15 5/8 inches. All glass block joints are 1/4 inch thick. Become familiar with the glass block wall areas. Limestone is the best stone to use as windowsills since it is less pervious. The main ingredient of mortar mix is Portland cement. Hydrated lime is the second most prevalent ingredient. Type S hydrated lime is most likely used. The lime is produced by a process called slaking. Mortar should be used within 2 1/2 hours of being mixed. Bondability is the most significant property of hardened mortar, and it is the most difficult to measure. Use Type M mortar when laying CMUs below grade. Figures 8-7 to 8-9. Be able to determine the cubic feet of mortar required per 100 square feet of wall. The grout placed in CMU cells should be rotted. The 3 types of masonry unit ties are corrugated, Z, and rectangular. Use a strap anchor when anchoring a partition wall to a bearing wall. Furrowing of the mortar produces a uniform bed. The story pole is used to ensure that the height of each course of brick or block is accurate. All metal placed in mortar joints, such as ties or reinforcement, must be at least 5/8 inch from the edge of the masonry. The sandblasting pressure normally used on masonry is 60 to 120 psi. Brick are normally cleaned using dilute hydrochloric acid. The airspace between cavity walls should be between 1 inch and 4 inches. The most common space is 2 inches. The recommended veneer spacing is 2 inches. The purpose of the flange of a 2-core block being wider at the top is to allow for a larger mortar bed for the next course. The mason's string line should be kept 1/16 inch from the edge of the masonry. The trig is used to make sure that the string line does not sag. The trig is used to make sure that the string line does not sag. Use a full mortar bed at the bed joint to increase the bond. The corner leads for a CMU wall should be at least 4 courses. Use a 5/8 inch diameter bar to tool a 3/8 inch mortar joint. Use a full mortar bed to increase the bondability. CMU wall mortar joints should be raked out to a depth of 3/4 of an inch to produce a control joint. Forms and stakes are used to control the finish elevation of a concrete slab. Foundation wall should be parged 6 inches above grade. Curtain walls are non-bearing walls that support themselves. The outside width of a cavity wall should have expansion joints no further apart than 50 feet. Place lintels over chases and recesses that are wider than 12 inches. Lintels used with masonry may be made using steel, concrete, or masonry. The strength of concrete increases fast when the temperature is high and slow when the temperature is low. Jack arches more than 2 feet wide should have steel supports. An arc would be classified as a segmental arc if the rise to width ratio is either 1:6, 1:8, 1:10, or 1:12. Stair treads constructed of brick shall be 12 inches wide. Welded wire mesh should be lapped one stay plus 2 inches. Concrete surface coatings, such as terrazzo, are normally 1/2 inch thick.
The superintendent oversees the daily activities on a job site.
The contract documents include the agreement, the general conditions, the special conditions, the technical specifications, and the drawings.
Become familiar with the different delivery systems.
The major types of cost estimates are conceptual and detailed. The two methods of scheduling a construction project are the bar chart and the critical path method. All subcontractors should be pre-evaluated.
Contractors should select their subcontractors for construction projects primarily based on the subcontractor's ability to provide the greatest value to the project.
Contractors should get certificates of insurance from all subcontractors.
The owner may require documentation that provides information about how the project was actually constructed. What is to be provided by the contractor trade subcontractors for this purpose? As-built drawings.
The most common communication device is a letter of transmittal. A request for information must never have a verbal response. The cost plus progress payment schedules are based on actual expenses.
In order to protect the contractor and owner from liens, which payment method is often used for third-tier subcontractors or suppliers? Joint check agreement. Retainage refers to a percentage of the progress payments withheld by the owner. Another name for an unconditional lien release is a final lien release.
The building department determines when a building is ready for occupancy.
Performance management includes management of performance standards and the creation of what? An employee appraisal system.
Value engineering is determining the best value of a project during the design phase. The following facts come from the Management of Construction Projects book. The following miscellaneous facts must be learned also.
The industry standard for balancing mechanical systems is ASHRAE. You must use a retention pond when clearing and grading more than 10 acres. Concrete test cylinders should be maintained between 60 and 80 degrees while stored at the job site. Rebar is hoisted the most during the first third of the project. The subcontractor is not expected to perform work at the job site if the job site is not accessible. Planning is the portion of an estimate which is considered non-productive. Gypsum board should be inspected after it is hung and before it is finished. A low solar heat gain coefficient rating indicates lower light transmission through a window.
The following facts come from paragraph 1926 of the OSHA book. The person who is in charge of OSHA on a construction project must be competent. The definition of an area with a small access is a confined space. An example would be a manhole. A handrail would not be an example of safety equipment used while tying horizontal rebars for a retaining wall. The prime contractor is responsible for the entire project. Boards with nails protruding must be removed from the work area. Be familiar with medical services and first aid requirements. In other words, a respirator is not required on a construction project.
When employees provide their own personal protective equipment, who is responsible for maintenance of the equipment? The employer.
Paragraphs .100 through .105 covers safety equipment like hard hats, eye protection, lanyards, and safety nets. Goggles or helmets may be used for welding. Safety belt lanyards shall not allow a fall greater than 6 feet. Safety nets shall extend 8 feet beyond the edge of a working platform. Paragraphs .150 through .154 covers fire protection. Heaters used in the vicinity of combustible tarpaulins shall not be located within 10 feet of the tarpaulin. Paragraph .250B covers material storage. Material shall not be stored within 10 feet of the exterior wall. Bagged material shall not be stacked higher than 10 bags high. Cubed brick stacks shall not be higher than 7 feet, while loose brick shall not be higher than 4 feet. Blocks shall not be stacked higher than 6 feet. Lumber may be stacked manually 16 feet high and mechanically 20 feet high. Rigging equipment must be inspected prior to its use. Paragraph .252 covers cleanup. Whenever materials are dropped more than 20 feet from an elevated platform, they must be dropped through a chute. Construction debris must be removed as work progresses. Oily rags and flammable liquids must be stored in fire-resistant covered containers. Paragraphs .300 through .303 cover small tools. Circular saws shall be equipped with a constant pressure switch. For cleaning purposes, the compressed air pressure must be less than 30 psi. Persons operating powder-actuated tools must be trained prior to using the tool. All portable, power-driven circular saws shall be equipped with upper and lower guards. Paragraph .350 through .353 covers storage of gases used in welding such as oxygen, propane, and acetylene. Warm water should be used to separate frozen oxygen cylinders. Gas cylinders must be secured in an upright position. Fuel gas cylinder valves must be opened slowly. Shields should be used around welding operations. Gas cylinders shall be secured in an upright position at all times. Oxygen cylinders shall be separated from fuel cylinders by at least 20 feet. Cylinders stored inside must be at least 20 feet from combustible materials. Before a regulator is connected to a gas cylinder, the valve should be opened slightly and closed immediately. Hoses used to carry fuel gases shall be inspected at the beginning of each shift. When working in confined spaces, welders must be equipped with lifelines, and an attendant with a pre-planned rescue procedure must be stationed outside. The arc welding machine must be turned off when the welder moves the machine. A lifeline must be used by workers working in confined spaces. Be able to determine the required clearances from electrical lines using these tables. Paragraph .450 through .454 covers scaffolding. The scaffold platform for workers applying stucco may be no more than 18 inches from the wall face. A scaffold must support its own weight and 4 times its intended load. The space between scaffold platform planks must not exceed 1 inch. Scaffold platforms must be at least 18 inches wide. Scaffold platforms must be not more than 14 inches from the face of the work. Outrigger scaffold platforms must not be more than 3 inches from the face of the building. Scaffold platforms used by workers applying stucco may not be more than 18 inches from the face of the building. Scaffold platforms shall extend at least 6 inches and not more than 12 inches past the support. Platforms greater than 10 feet long may extend 18 inches past the support. Scaffold platforms that overlap must overlap at least 12 inches. Pole scaffold legs should bear on a mud sill. When hook-on ladders are used on supported scaffolds, rest platforms at a maximum of 35 feet intervals must be provided. For access from one scaffold to another, the horizontal distance between them must not exceed 14 inches. The top of guardrails for supported scaffolds must be between 38 and 45 inches above the platform surface. Diagonal bracing in both directions shall be installed across the entire outside face of all double and single pole scaffolds. Crawling boards shall be secured to the roof with ridge hooks. The maximum intended load on ship's scaffolds is 750 pounds. Scaffold casters shall have a locking mechanism. Paragraphs .501 and .502 covers fall protection. Work areas more than 6 feet high must have fall protection. Workers reaching more than 10 inches below the working surface of a scaffold shall be protected from falling with a guardrail. If the sill height for a window more than 6 feet above grade is at least 39 inches, no guardrail across the opening is required.
A hoist is not a component of a fall arrest system.
Guardrail height shall be 42 inches plus or minus 3 inches. Intermediate guardrail members, when used between posts, shall be not more than 19 inches apart. Wire rope guardrails must be flagged at intervals not exceeding 6 feet. The safety net test weight must be 400 pounds. Horizontal lifelines must have a safety factor of 2. Attachment point of a body harness is the center of the wearer's back. Warning lines shall be erected not more than 6 feet from the roof edge. Wire rope warning lines must be located at least 34 and not more than 39 inches above the work surface. Roofing material shall not be stored within 6 feet of a roof edge. Power lines less than 50 kV must be de-energized when a crane boom is operating less than 10 feet from the line. Paragraph .651 and 652 cover soils and excavations. A kickout is the accidental release or failure of a cross brace. The definition of a trench is an excavation where the depth is greater than the width and the width of the bottom is less than 15 feet. Means of egress are required for trenches more than 4 feet deep, and such means may not require travel of more than 25 feet. When hazardous atmospheres appear to exist in an excavation, the atmosphere must be tested prior to workers entering the excavation. Stored materials must be stored at least 2 feet from the edge of an excavation. Excavations should be inspected daily.
You are allowed to excavate 2 feet below a shield system.
Be familiar with the OSHA soil classification systems and the visual and manual tests used to classify soils. The sides of excavations more than 5 feet deep must be sloped. Paragraphs .751 through .758 covers structural steel. Note that paragraph .757 covers bar joist. There shall be no more than 8 stories between the erection floor and the uppermost permanent floor. There shall be no more than 4 floors or 48 feet of unfinished bolting or welding above the uppermost permanent floor. A fully planked floor or net is required within 2 stories or 30 feet of any erection floor. Paragraph .1053 covers ladders. Ladder side rails must extend 3 feet above the surface being accessed. The horizontal distance from the top support of a ladder to the foot of the ladder should be 1/4 of the working length. The top step of a stepladder shall not be used. Stepladders must be faced while ascending or descending. A citation must be posted at the job site within 3 days of receipt. Examples of the manual classification test are the plasticity test, the dry strength test, the thumb pressure test, and the drying test.
The sand cone test is not used to determine the soil classification by OSHA. The angle of repose for sharp sand is 1 1/2 to 1.
The following facts come from the pipe book. Soil removed from an excavation will swell because it is less compact, while soil used to backfill will shrink due to it being more compact. The formula for calculating the volume in cubic yards is the length times the width times the thickness divided by 27. To calculate the load factor, divide the bank volume by the bank volume plus the swell factor. The capacity of a heaped backhoe bucket is 130% of the capacity of a struck bucket. The sheep's foot roller is the best equipment to compact soils in a wide ditch with no cross lines. If a reference stake has a number surrounded by a circle, the number represents the offset distance in feet from the hub to the center of the excavation. The letter C, followed by a number, represents the distance from the top of the hub to the flow line of a pipe. A station equals 100 feet. A 45-degree slope is a 100% slope. Sedimentary rock is the easiest rock to rip with a bulldozer. The groundwater level varies from season to season. A well point system is the best method to dewater an excavation. The pump should be monitored to ensure a safe working area. A well point system is the best method to dewater an excavation. The pump should be monitored to ensure a safe working area. A set for a backhoe is the volume that can be excavated from one setup. Replace soaked subgrade soil with dry fill. The best equipment to excavate a ditch in soft soil that is more than 8 foot deep is a track excavator. Moist or saturated soil is less stable than dry dirt. Spreader jacks are the best type of shoring to use with firm soils. The trench box is used to prevent the sides of a trench from caving in on a worker. Become familiar with the moisture density relationships of soils. The nuclear density device is the fastest method used to determine the in-place density of compacted soil because you do not have to take samples of soil back to the laboratory for further testing. The best method for compacting a sandy soil is puddling. The most accurate method to calculate the volume of excavation is to divide the area into small sections and calculate the volume of each section. The subgrade of a road is the surface that carries the base course. As contour lines become closer together, the slope becomes steeper. As contour lines become closer together, the slope becomes steeper. The best equipment to transport a large volume of soil over a moderate distance is a scraper. A push dozer will help load a scraper in muddy soil. The most important activity for a motor grader is final finishing. The lightweight dozer is the best to use for landscaping. If the lift, tilt, or angle of the blade is wrong, the load will be lost. A bulldozer should be aligned toward the dump zone. The normal bulldozer speed varies from 1 1/2 to 4 miles per hour. The advantage of slot dozing is that it prevents the material from being side-cast. The advantage of an angle blade on a dozer is that it allows the material to be side-cast. The following facts come from the post-tensioning book. The concrete should reach at least 75% of its design strength before the post-tensioning cables are stressed. What is done by the post-tensioning contractor prior to pouring concrete? The tendons are encased in high-density polyethylene sheathing with a post-tensioning coating. Since producing zero tension in a post-tension member is very expensive, most members have rebar added. This is called partial pre-stressing. The banded cable should be lifted by passing a nylon strap through the center of the bundle and attaching each end to the lifting equipment. Install post-tensioning cables in a slab pour prior to installing the plumbing and electrical rough end. The plastic sleeve should be cut back 1 inch from the form pocket, and the cable should extend 12 inches from the form. If the cables are grouped, the maximum number of 6/10 inch thick diameter cables is 4, while the maximum number of 0.5 inch diameter cables is 5. The post-tensioning cables must have a minimum of 6 inches clearance around all blockouts. The minimum spacing between post-tensioning cables and a concrete beam is 1 1/2 inches. The cable should be supported by using a number 4 rebar. Add blocks to help the effects of reverse curvature. Add blocks to help the effects of reverse curvature. When using a 2-stroke pull on post-tension cables, the final stroke should be 60% of the total pull. After stressing the cable, the end may be cut off to within 1/2 inch of the wedge. A cap filled with post-tension lubricant shall be placed over the end of the cable within 24 hours and never more than 96 hours after the cable is cut off. When tensioning a barrier cable, the cable should be stressed to 80% of the ultimate stress. A broken post-tensioning cable should be replaced with a new cable. The following facts come from the Principles and Practices of Commercial Construction book. Be able to determine the bearing capacity of different types of soils using this table. A high water table would increase the cost to construct foundations. The purpose of a penetrometer is to measure the bearing capacity of soils. A vernier plate is used to measure the angle of turn of a transit. Either the standard or modified Proctor test provide the contractor with information regarding soil compaction value to be achieved. What is the minimum thickness of compacted granular materials that is to be used as the base of a concrete curb? 6 inches. Expansion joints in concrete sidewalks should be provided in intervals of not more than 30 feet. The following methods are used to ensure that the sidewalls of excavations remain stable: interlocking sheet piles, steel soldier piles, and concrete slurry walls. The type of shoring used to stabilize a building is underpinning. The type of pile where the cross-sectional area is important is a bearing pile. Sheet piles resist horizontal loads.
Waffle slabs are produced using metal pan or fiberglass dome forms.
Become familiar with the parts of a wall form. A spandrel beam is a beam that spans openings in exterior walls.
What type of form should be used when forming waffle slabs in a multi-story building? Pan forms.
Become familiar with the structural steel shapes shown in Figure 10-3. Bolt holes for bolted connections are 1/16 inch larger than the diameter of the bolt.
When assembling a lightweight curtain wall, what is placed between the building insulation and the external metal panel? An air gap.
EPDM joints are made using joint adhesive.
What material is best used to fireproof steel beams and columns? Cellular concrete.
Masonry control joints are vertical joints that separate walls into sections and allow freedom of movement. The following facts come from the rebar book. When the columns, beams, and slabs are formed at one time, the columns should be poured first. Stirrups are added to beam reinforcing to increase the shear and torsion resistance.
There are 11 different sizes of rebar.
Rust is allowed on the surface of rebar. Spreader bars are used to lift long rebar. Concrete cover is the distance from the edge of the concrete to the edge of the rebar. The spacing of the longitudinal rebar is not critical. Rebar should not be spaced more than 3 times the thickness of a slab or wall. The rebar tie most commonly used in walls is a wrap and snap tie. The main purpose of tie wire is to hold reinforcing bars in place. Reinforcing bars should be located 3 inches from the bottom of a mat slab and 2 inches from the top. A standee is used to support the top bars in a thick slab. Each reinforcing bar should be tied at least 3 times. Rebar bolsters are furnished in 5-foot lengths. Joist chairs normally carry 2 bars. Temperature reinforcing is normally placed on top of other reinforcing.
Longitudinal rebar has the largest tolerance for placement.
The following facts are from the roofing book. Solid roof sheathing must be used if the design temperature is less than 0 degrees. A 1x6 is the best 1x board to use for roof decking. When the deck sheathing boards are spaced, the distance from the edge of one sheathing board to the next one is equal to the exposure of the shingles. Underlayment under asphalt shingles does not serve as a vapor barrier. Felt underlayment should lap 2 inches from course to course and 4 inches at the ends. 15-pound felt is not a recommended method to prevent ice dams.
Flashing built into the vertical surface and bent down over the base flashing is called counter flashing or cap flashing.
Roofing nails should always be driven straight. When installing roofing tiles, battens must be installed for slopes greater than 7 and 12. Use 3 gallons of asphalt per square per layer for built-up roof systems. Vapor retarders in built-up roof systems prevent moisture from moving from the inside of the building into the roof insulation. Type 3 asphalt is the most common use for built-up roofs. Flash points range from 437 degrees to 500 degrees. Always stay 25 degrees below the flash point.
The reasons to place stone over a built-up roof include acting as a ballast and to resist ultraviolet rays.
Allow 1 inch of airspace between insulation and the roof deck. Condensation occurs when warm, moist air comes in contact with a cold surface. Be familiar with this entire chapter. Leaks at plumbing vents are caused by improper installation of the shingles. A leak in asphalt shingles can be repaired using roofing cement with sand granules. Repair asphalt shingles in the summer because they are more pliable. To replace a broken slate shingle, simply replace the shingle and nail it in place. The main reason to ventilate unconditioned space is to control the moisture in the space. The following facts come from the deck book. Review this section in detail to become more familiar with composite deck. There are 4 types of steel deck: composite, roof, cellular, and form. Deck is supplied in 12-inch, 18-inch, 24-inch, 30-inch, and 36-inch widths. Shear connectors, sometimes called studs, are used to mechanically lock the concrete and deck together. Composite deck finishes are either galvanized or phosphatized. All penetrations in steel deck are made by the trade needing the penetration. Roof deck should be lapped 2 inches. Cellular deck provides chases for wiring. The variation in weight for composite deck is 2 pounds per square foot to 4 pounds per square foot, while the variation in thickness is 0.03 inches to 0.06 inches. 1x6 WR roof deck is referred to as B deck, while 1x6 IR roof deck is referred to as F deck. The minimum thickness for standard form deck is 0.014 inches. The minimum bundle weight for deck is 4,000 pounds. Deck should be stored off the ground with one end elevated for drainage. The deck bundle should be placed along the column lines with the ends of the bundles resting on the structural supports. Working areas around deck bundles should be 12 feet wide. Always kneel down when placing steel deck. Floor deck should have a 50 pound per square foot capacity to be used as a working platform, while roof deck should have a 30 pound per square foot capacity. Roof deck should bear a minimum of 1 1/2 inches. All deck laps should be over supports. Corrugated metal deck is attached at the ends of each sheet to structural elements. They are also attached along the edges to each other. Screws or welds are used to make these attachments. The most common screw size is a number 12. Welding is not recommended to attach corrugated metal deck to structural elements unless the deck thickness is greater than 22 gauge, which is 0.028 inches. Weld washers may be used if the deck is less than 22 gauge. Weld washers should not be used to produce edge welds. An edge weld is satisfactory if 75% of the weld puddle is attached to steel. A 6-inch hole in corrugated metal deck does not require any plate reinforcing. An 8-inch hole requires a 0.45-inch thick plate, while an 8-inch to a 13-inch hole would require a 0.057-inch thick plate. More than 13-inch holes require frame supports. For openings up to 24 inches perpendicular to the deck, a C4 by 5.4 channel may be used for support. The following facts come from the truss book. For horizontal storage, trusses must be blocked off the ground if they are stored for more than 1 week. Use a spreader bar to lift trusses that are longer than 30 feet. Trusses should be braced at a maximum of 25 feet. The bottom cord of a wood truss should be braced at intervals not exceeding 15 feet. A diagonal brace requires 2 16-penny nails at each truss.